Hey y'all, welcome back to Most of It. Y'all may have picked up on this by now, but I rather enjoy 40K. I like the vastness of the setting with all the weird and varied characters and events. The lore is convoluted, and at times I wonder if Games Workshop even cares about it, but when it hits, it really hits, and many Warhammer books are some of my favorite books of all time. I enjoy the 40K community and the enthusiasm with which we all discuss aspects of the hobby, and I love the way we wear out memes within 20 minutes of finding them funny. Yeah, I like 40K, and I'm not afraid to say it. But you know what I don't like? The greyknights, the eternal Mary Sues of the setting. Every time I read a piece of greyknights lore, at best I roll my eyes, and at worst it makes me write something like this. They're all just so poorly scaled and written that it just pisses me off, especially since their base concept is one of the coolest in the setting. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. The greyknights do have some pretty cool moments, so let's go over them real quick. Quick disclaimer, as with everything negative I say about 40K, I am in no way trying to discourage you from liking what you like. If you love the greyknights and Caldor Drago is your best friend, that is totally valid and I'm happy for you. I make these videos for fun, and don't let anything I say rain on your parade. But with all that said, let's get into this. So the Grey Knight's origins are actually really cool in my opinion. Throughout the Horus Heresy, the Emperor and Malcador quickly learned that chaos was unpredictable and cunning, and so they had to kind of scramble to get some contingencies in place. With the Emperor stuck on the Golden Throne due to Magnus' folly, Malcador began going around and putting a team together. The first of these members would be Nathaniel Garrow of the Death Guard. After leaving Isfahan III and heading to Terra to warn the Emperor of Horus' betrayal, he was kinda legionless, and so Malcador swooped in and gave him a new purpose. After getting interrogated for a while, and there was no stain of heresy found on Garrow, he was clad in grey armor bearing the mark of the Sigillite and became an official knight errant of Malcador. He would be sent all around the Imperium to collect what were essentially Astartes of interest from a whole bunch of different legions, including the traitor ones. He went to Calth and picked up a librarian, ultramarine, a loyalist world eater, and even went to Isfahan and found a thoroughly insane Garville Loken, and brought them all back to the Sol system to be trained. Well, around this time, Garrow would essentially quit the Knight Errants and start traveling around and preparing for the eventual siege of Terra. In the meantime, though, the remaining Knight Errants would be charged with tracking down the shards of Magnus that were scattered when he broke the Emperor's Webway project. So after a while, the White Scars pull up to the Sol system, and with them is a loreless Thousand Son named Revrul Arvida, who is deep in the flesh change, locked in a stasis casket to prevent it from progressing. Well, Malcador sees this and says, you know what, this guy's gonna die anyway, and we need someone to replace the Emperor on the Golden Throne. And the shard of Magnus is right here, so yeah, Malcador decides to shove the largest shard of Magnus into Arvida in hopes of making a weaker version of the Primarch to sit on the Golden Throne and free up Big E to handle bigger things. He tries it, and initially it doesn't go very well, with Arvida mutating and being set on psychic fire, until Jagatai Khan bursts in the room and destroys the machine running the whole operation. This causes Arvida to stabilize, and he rises from his slab, now bearing a scarred up eye like Magnus did. Arvida then pronounced himself to be Ianius, or as he's also called, Janus. And while he wouldn't be able to sit on the Golden Throne, he was still a really powerful psyker and perfect for Malcador's backup plan. On the moon Titan, 9 Knight Errants were gathered to be judged by the Emperor. These would be the progenitors of the Grey Knights, although one of them, Garville Loken, would refuse the offer and left to help Terra out when the traitors came. Those remaining on Titan would be appointed with new names, with Janus being named their Supreme Grand Master, as Malcador sealed the moon within the warp in order to keep it secret and safe during the approaching siege, with it set to emerge sometime afterward. When it did eventually return to real space, the moon was made into a fortress, with a bunch of Grey Knights having been made for the sole purpose of defending the Imperium from chaos in the warp, with each Grey Knight being a potent psyker trained rigorously to wield their powers effectively. So that's in a nutshell retelling of the Grey Knight's origins, and like I said, they're really cool. The idea of cast-off space marines being used to make essentially an anti-chaos task force is awesome, and I can't honestly say that them casting Titan into the warp isn't super dope. But this all raises some questions, like what gene seed do the Grey Knights bear? Well, if you ask the Imperium and the Grey Knights codexes, the official answer is that they use the genome of the Emperor himself, which is why they're so powerful. I hate this answer, and personally don't believe it to be true. Reason 1. If the Grey Knights are made from the Emperor's genome, that essentially makes them Primarchs, but without the supposed warp shenanigans that the Emperor did on Molech. But why is that a bad thing, you say? Well, let's say that you have a chapter of what are essentially diet versions of Primarchs running around. I'm sorry, nothing stands a chance against that. If the Imperium has that at their disposal, why the heck aren't the Grey Knights leading in charge of all the other chapters across the galaxy, wiping everything out? It throws off the whole idea that the Imperium is a broken empire, with every day bringing them closer and closer to ruin. But never mind that, because they have a couple thousand slightly shorter Primarchs that could totally do something about it, but don't. And if the Emperor could use his gene seed to make space marines, why did he have to bother with the Primarchs? Why didn't he just do that from the beginning? It makes no sense. At that point, just make Magnus and maybe Dorn to help hold Terra, but that's it. That's all you need. So that's reason 1. Reason 2 is mostly a narrative issue, but it's tied to reason 1. If the Grey Knights bear the Emperor's genes, then the Emperor doesn't have 20 sons, he has thousands. The Primarchs being genetic sons of the Emperor from a narrative perspective is one of the things that makes them special. Saying 9 of the Imperium's generals turned against the Emperor has way less weight to it than saying 9 of the Emperor's sons turns against him. So to open that up to more than just the Primarchs is narratively unsatisfying, to me at least. And reason 3, Space Marines in my opinion should not be able to use the Emperor's gene seed. As far as my understanding goes, the Grey Knight's induction on a physical level is the same as all the other Astartes. They find aspirants with psychic abilities and shove a bunch of organs in them and they get all big and buff and stuff. But what separates the Grey Knights from the other Marines is that, 1, they're all psychers, duh, but it's mostly their training and conditioning. But with all that said, I don't think a normal Astartes aspirant could handle the Emperor's genes. If they were handled like Custodes, where each is a handmade masterpiece of genetic engineering, then I could maybe see it, but otherwise I can't. Okay then, most of it, you may be saying. Who should the Grey Knight's sire be? Well, the answer is kind of obvious, isn't it? It should be Magnus, and I think that lore was actually set up for it to be him. During the Siege of Terra, when Magnus tried to assassinate the Emperor, they had a psychic meeting, and Biggie offered Magnus a new legion if he came back to the Imperium. Now, many question the validity of this, as Vulcan kind of said Magnus hallucinated or lied about it, but I personally believe it's accurate. Magnus was the most crucial Primarch for the Emperor's plan to work, and so of course he would be the first to get an invite to join. And if the Grey Knights were the new legion that was made for Magnus with his gene seed, then it would make perfect sense. That would explain why they are resistant to the warp, are all psychers, and really powerful ones at that, and potentially Magnus could even have reclaimed his noble shard from Janus and became whole again. The one flaw I see with this is that the Grey Knights lack the flesh change. According to my research, the flesh change was a flaw in Magnus' gene seed, which was either partially caused or at the very least exploited by Tzeentch. So potentially, if Magnus' gene seed was somehow repaired with pieces of the Emperor's, who as we know is anathema to chaos, then I could totally see it being fixed and Tzeentch not being able to touch it anymore. And I think that's the best answer for the Grey Knight's gene seed, with it hailing mostly from Magnus with patches here and there from the Emperor. Of course, there's another idea I've heard that the Grey Knight's gene sire is one of the lost Primarchs, and I could totally see that. I've always thought that if Magnus was so essential that the Emperor should have made a backup for him, but this theory could suggest that Magnus was actually the backup and that one of the lost Primarchs was a super powerful psyker. It's a cool theory, but of course we'll never get a good answer to it, so it's kinda not worth even discussing at this point. But moving on, those are my problems with the Grey Knight's origins, and while I do find it pretty cool, there are some holes that I can't ignore. But what are they like in the modern setting? Mary Sue's. They are Mary Sue's. And it's mostly because of this guy right here, Caldor Drago. Look, if you like this guy, good for you. I still like you, but I cannot stand him. One of his first actions in his lore was to banish Demon Mortarion by speaking his true name and then carving his predecessor's name on his heart. That's a really cool introduction for a character, right? Yes, until you start looking at other cases in the lore. Pretty much all the other times the Demon Primarch has been banished, it's been a massive conjoined effort, like Angron on Armageddon, or Magnus on Fenris, or Mortarion on Macrack. It always takes a huge amount of people working together, and it's even really hard for a Primarch to do it. But then old Caldor Drago walks up, tells Mortarion a yo mama joke, and suddenly he can have his way with him? It's just dumb. I know the whole demon true name thing is common in fantasy, but here are my problems with it in 40k. Throughout the lore, it's shown a few times that Primarchs have true names. Leman Russ has used his own against a demonic version of himself, and Angron's been banished using it in the past. It makes sense. They are massively powerful beings that are theorized to be lesser warp gods given bodies, so it makes sense for them to have them. My problem is that it takes away all the stakes. There's no way that the Emperor didn't know all the true names of the Primarchs, and so the Siege of Terra could have just been won with a loudspeaker. If the Emperor had hopped on the mic and said, "Hey, true name sons, I win, you die infinity +1, I see no reason why that wouldn't have worked. Of course, I'm exaggerating slightly for comedic purposes, but it's still a legitimate thing that the Emperor could have done if true names are really that powerful. I've seen some arguments that saying true names like wears out the speaker and that's why the Emperor never used it, but if that's the case, then there's no way that friggin' Caldor Drago should have been able to do it. So if you ask me to set up rules for the use of true names, here's what I'd say. The demons that are straight up Neverborn have true names that paralyze and give you control over them in the traditional sense. The demon Primarchs and princes that ascended also have true names, but they're much less effective due to the fact that they're not purely warp-born, and mortals also have true names, but they're even less effective than that, and maybe just give people a headache. And in all three categories, the names are super hard to find and hard to pronounce, not in a random book in the Grey Knight's library. Boom, I've solved the problem forever. I'll await my check, Games Workshop. So those are all mostly issues with true names rather than the Grey Knights and Drago, but one of his more recent pieces of lore is that he got cursed to essentially walk around the warp forever. Now, as far as I'm aware, this is totally feasible, if you're powerful enough, of course. A lot of the Primarchs are doing it, and several other species like orcs have gotten stuck and walked around the warp for a while, so I don't have a massive issue with this. My problem is what he's doing while he's in there. From what I've read, he's essentially going around to all the Chaos Gods' domains and clapping the cheeks of some of their most powerful champions by himself while in their own domain. Do you have any idea how powerful you have to be to do that? That puts Drago at like Magnus tier of power when there's no good reason that I know of at least that he should be that powerful. At least with the other powerful marines like Mephiston, it's believed that he has a piece of Sanguinius' soul inside him. But Drago? Nah, he's just a dude that was trained really well. I mean, come on. At least have him find like a lost shard of Magnus and that's why he's so powerful. Just explain it to some degree and it'll make so much more sense. Also, slight side note, occasionally Chaos Cultists will try to summon a demon and instead they'll get Caldor Drago, and that's a really funny detail which actually makes sense from a lore perspective, so good job on that, Games Workshop. Overall, Caldor Drago's just too strong and we know too little about him to justify him being that strong. But now let's talk a little more broadly about the Grey Knights as a whole. One thing I do like about them is their training. They have to go through what's called the 666 Rites of Detestation, which is a super cool name, first of all. And while I don't think we know many of them specifically, what we do know about Grey Knights training is pretty interesting. They have to pass generic Space Marine training like fighting and such, but then they have to hunt down and kill one of the 666 most powerful demons and bring back a token of them doing it, like a tooth or a horn or something. I'll admit it, that's a dope way to do things, but it opens up more issues that I have with the Grey Knights. Given that they are still Space Marines with the same training, couldn't a standard librarian potentially reach the same level of power as them? I mean, supposedly the only thing that separates the Grey Knights from a standard Astartes is the Emperor's genome, and training, of course, but as I discussed earlier, Big E being their gene sire doesn't really make sense, so really it's only training and possibly gear. And if that's the case, then the Imperium needs to train more of these guys. Space Marines aren't living anywhere near to their full potential, and that's a shame. And then there's the fact that supposedly the Grey Knights are super elite, powerful Space Marines. So where does that put the Space Wolves? Because the Knights got manhandled by them during the Months of Shame. In terms of power levels, that puts Logan Grimnar like just below Big E. The Grey Knights are simultaneously too overpowered and too weak, and none of it makes any sense. But that brings up yet another point about the Grey Knights' practice of liquidating people in order to keep their order secret. Here's the thing. Why does it matter? To any Imperial citizen, if they see a Grey Knight, they aren't going to think, oh, these guys are fighting chaos, and that means chaos is real, praise the Eightfold Path. They'll just go, wow, one of the Emperor's Angels of Death. I should go somewhere else. I don't want to be a part of this fight. Also, odds are, like most Imperial Guardsmen have already seen some form of chaos stuff, whether they knew it or not. So staying secret from them doesn't make sense, and staying secret from the Space Marines makes even less sense as Marines fight chaos all the time. Most chapters wear anti-chaos wards on their armor and have special training to combat it, so why does it matter? I've also talked in the past about how I don't like most Psyker factions, and Grey Knights and Eldar are the epitome of those issues for me. Too often, the Grey Knights wins remind me of being a kid playing tag and having that one kid just make up random rules that means only he can win. Like, oh, Demon Mortarian's here? Well, I have a book that happens to say your name, and you are nitpicking and biased. I win, bye-bye. I don't know. This stuff just irritates me for some reason. And then, of course, there's the most recent piece of Grey Knight lore that was revealed in their recent codex, the Terminus Decree. And for those of you in the back, here's what it is. For a while, there's been this box in possession of the Grey Knights that only Supreme Grand Master may open. We didn't know what the contents were up until recently when it was revealed that inside the box is a command from the Emperor stating that he can never be allowed to leave the Golden Throne, and that's the Grey Knight's job to keep it that way. Look, there's still a possibility that this will lead up to something cool, so I won't crap on it too much. But seriously, Games Workshop? You had an out for pretty much any situation had you just kept the content secret. Nobody cared what was in that box, and we certainly didn't want it to be something like this. But okay, let's say that what you see is what you get, and the Emperor believes that he has to stay on the Golden Throne. I can see a couple reasons why he would say this, like for instance, he could ascend to become the Dark King again and won't be able to control it, or he's like lost the ability to reincarnate, and if he steps off the throne, he'll die forever. I don't think they're good reasons, but they're reasons. But whatever, let's say it's something like that. Why would the Grey Knights be in charge of managing this then? Like, I'm sorry, gas them up all you like, but there's no way that they would be able to make it through the custodies to the throne room. And like, if anyone should know about the Terminus Decree, shouldn't it be the custodies? You know, the unflinchingly loyal bodyguards of the Emperor? The most likely reason for all this is that the Emperor will need a big blast of psychic juice to get off the throne, and so he would consume the Grey Knights. But even if that is the case, there's no reason that this need to be revealed right now. It's honestly baffling to me, like, what were they thinking with this piece of lore? Oh, and don't get me started on the fact that if any other Space Marine chapters got a whiff of this, especially the Space Wolves, they would make a beeline for Terra and absolutely trounce the Grey Knights, but that's a topic for another day. So overall, to sum up my feelings on the Grey Knights, I think they're an awesome idea that were just executed very poorly, and I hope to see some course correction in the future. But even with all that, I do really like their model range. Sure, it's outdated, but it's still really cool. And again, if you love the Grey Knights, more power to you. I couldn't be happier for you. I just don't. But with all that said, thank y'all for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video, and let me know in the comments what you think of the Grey Knights. Be sure to check out my community tab where I post memes and run polls from time to time, and with all that said, You have a great day, and I'll see y'all later.